Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another one of my podcasts. Thanks for tuning in. And as you can see, I'm also doing it. Well, you can't see if you're listening. That's a bit silly, but I'm also doing it on video on Zoom in these strange times in the time of COVID-19. I'm delighted to have Stuart Bennett, all the way from sunny Brisbane, online, as it were, where we kind of bumped into each other on LinkedIn, started a conversation, and Stuart is I'm probably going to get this wrong, but he's in the round an executive coach in the professional service sector, primarily for law firms, which is very much a market that I focused on. So Stuart and I have had a bit of to and fro on LinkedIn, and I thought, hey, why not get Stuart on the podcast? Let's have a chat, see what he's seeing on his side of the world, and then see where this goes. So Stuart, who, what, why, where?
Well, thanks for having me on, first of all, Alex. It's pretty cool. We did connect on LinkedIn, which is fitting, given that's your sort of area of expertise.
Yeah.
That we actually connected on LinkedIn. Yeah, so look, I'm an executive coach that works basically with lawyers. I call myself a thought partner, and that's mainly because I think that's what I largely do. Officially, it's executive coaching, but I'm kind of like a sounding board and a confidant for senior lawyers, usually probably from the senior associate level up to partner. I work with most lawyers in most areas of law, from commercial lawyers to personal injury lawyers, the whole breadth, mainly at the big end of town. A few of the sort of mid-sized firms. I occasionally have people come to me directly, which I work with, but it's just by circumstances, it tends to be the bigger end of town. And I have a bit of a specialization, I guess, with councils going to partnership. So that's sort of big. That's the sort of thing, really the big leap in a lawyer's career. And so I often work with counsel, and firms get me in to help the counsel get through to partnership. Awesome. Yeah, so that's what I roughly do. Why I do this? I'll give you the short version. There is a longer version. Of course, there's always a longer version.
Indeed.
I was an academic originally. I used to teach corporate governance, and up here in Queensland, actually on the Gold Coast, which is a very nice place to be at a university, near the beach, etc., etc. And I got offered a job at the University of Sydney, and it was in my area. It was a really good job, sort of the job. I don't know about a dream job, but it was a dream job for the time. It was the right, really good job for the time. And so I accepted it. And just before I took it up, I got chronically ill. And I was chronically ill for about 17 years, which, as you can imagine, is a fairly long time. So I wasn't able to work for about 17 years. And so when I started to get better, I want to do something completely different. And someone said to me, I had a friend who was a partner in an organizational development firm out of Sydney called Nous. And she said to me, you make a great coach. And I thought to myself, that sounds like a group hug. I'm not really sure that sort of thing. What is this thing? And she said, no, don't be so cynical. I'm going through this work thing. Talk me through it. You sort of do this anyway. And so I thought, so I sort of worked with her through it. And then I did some training. And then I thought, all right, I'll give this thing a bash. And I sort of coached whoever I could. And I started out from consultants to government to artists. I think I actually also coached a busker.
Right. Okay.
Who used to be homeless, was trying to make it as a busker. So this core things. I come across it would have been a law partner. It might be a little bit separate to law. IP, in the IP space, it was a quasi-law sort of place. And I coached him, and when I coached him, it sort of really opened my eyes out to the legal profession and the nature of the law firm. And it sort of struck me that the nature of the law firm, generalizing the nature of personality attracted to the law, and the not so modern law firm business model sort of really lent itself to coaching. It really lent itself to having some time out to stop and reflect on what you're doing, why you're doing it. All my clients generally are either extremely busy, and if they're not, they're extremely worried. It's the kind of two extremes in there. And I'm sure there's some in the middle, but often, you're either really, really busy, and that means you're trying to balance all those things like being a leader as well as being on the tools, trying to deal with work, some sort of semblance of work-life balance while working massive hours. Or you're say you're a litigator and you've had a couple of really big pieces of work and they've closed, and you were so busy running those you hadn't really filled your pipeline quite yet. A couple of circumstances, you might get conflicted out of a couple of pieces of work and suddenly you've got to go, oops, like I've got to get my budget back up after smashing it for so many years. So you got all those sort of challenges. So I think that's where, why. Is there a how in there?
There's a how. There's a bit of a how, and I was sort of looking at your, because obviously I've worked in a law firm as well, and some of the areas that you cover just looking at your LinkedIn profile. So leadership development, business development, profile branding, profile building, and internal influence. I think is an interesting one. High performance team building, career transitions, work-life integration, providing thought-proving, insightful seminars. That's an interesting one as well. Which, certainly from my experience, and I had a Myers-Briggs test done when I was at Berman Leighton Payson at BLP, as was before the merger, and I'm very much on the I think I'm ENTJ, so the extrovert kind of side of things. Whereas, and again, generalists, lawyers are very much on the I side of things and kind of the introverts. And I remember my my former boss Dominic, having come from a kind of out-and-out sales background. One thing that he explained to me is that lawyers are very, very cerebral and they like process. And I come from Big Four PwC consulting, so I was kind of used to that environment of having robust conversations and debates. And he said, whatever you do, don't fill the gaps. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, if you say something and there's a pause, because he's ex-Oracle, as a salesperson, we want to fill the gap because we're kind of uncomfortable. Oh my God, no one's saying anything. Whereas what the lawyers are typically doing is they're analyzing and processing what you're saying, and they need that silence to kind of help the thought process. And if you interrupt that silence, that is kind of almost an affront to the psychology of how their brain works. And it was a real transition for me to kind of get to, having come from the consulting environment into this kind of very cerebral environment, and also being a non-person for the first time ever in my life, being referred to as a non-lawyer. I was like, really? What? So what are the main, and again, I appreciate we're talking broad brushstrokes, so what are the kind of the main things that let's focus on counsel moving to partner initially, because that is a big transition, or in the UK, senior associate to partner. What are the sort of things that they have to grapple with to make that leap?
Yeah, let me just comment on that thing you said first. I think that's really insightful. I think your boss had a really good insight there, that idea of not filling the gaps. I think that's, look, as a coach, that's something you have to do. So there's silence. And I think the other thing you make observation, lawyers tend to be cerebral. And I quite like that. I think it's, from a business perspective, it's probably an easier business as an executive coach in other industries than in law firms. It's hard to get, it's a hard area to get in. I've had jokes like, there's a senior partner in Brisbane who's introduced me to places I would have got work through him and that, and he wouldn't have a coach. And he's just said to me straight up, it's a bit like saying you go and see a psychologist, It's this sort of, you've got a little bit of that around there as well, yet you've got that on one side, and the other side, I've been quite fortunate. People have been willing to give me open testimonials on my website. So, and I get work mainly through word of mouth. So you've got this sort of strange sort of mix of just a strange dynamic, I think, culture as well. But then, the cerebralness is what appeals. It might be harder for me to get work as a business here, but the quality of the work's fantastic. My clients I love working with my clients. So they're great. They're all smarter, brighter than I am. And it's fantastic to sort of play a bit of a role in their careers. So to get to your question, the obvious thing with counsel to partner is get all your metrics in order, right?
Yeah.
Law firms are metrics driven in the end, like it's very hard to have the conversation about being partner unless you can show that your metrics are right up there. With competing with all the other people in your firm, particularly if an international firm, in lots of different markets around the world, with very different, not maybe similar metrics, but very different business situations.
Yeah.
So your metrics have to be you're right. And I think when I work with a counsel, it's usually they've ticked all the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got your metrics right. People want to put you up. You've got the main things. And the question you're trying to do is you're trying to fine tune. You're trying to differentiate yourself from that top level to just that extra level. And I think the key with that is narrative. And that's the story you're telling. So where you're going, what you're doing. So you've got a business case. I can think of, I won't say who, but I do help some counsel about the partnership in a sort of magic circle style firm. And because if I say magic circle, that's probably narrowing it down a bit too much, isn't it? But we say magic circle style. And if you look at all the applicants, all the people going up to partnership, there's not much difference, right?
Yeah.
there's not a lot of difference. You know, you've got different areas. You might be in commercial, one might be in banking. But if you look at the core things, they use the same language that the company wants to use.
Yeah.
They know what the metrics, they haven't got up unless they've ticked off the metrics. The managing partner's not going to put them up unless they've ticked off the metrics. So you've got this thing. And what tends to happen is it tends to become very corporate. Anyone could read it. So you could just read out your business case. It just sounds like any other business case anywhere around anywhere. And so one of the things I do is I try and get them to think about that in a much more personal way. What's your personal story? You know, why are you a lawyer? Why do you want to be a partner? And just look at a bigger picture. And that helps you start to weave a bit of a story through. And so I think that's sort of an important part of it. The other part is, you know, if you want to get up to partnership, you've got to be known internally. It's not enough to be just a fantastic technical lawyer.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite frustrating for some lawyers because they can be absolutely fantastic technical lawyers. But, you know, if they had their ideal, they're probably, I mean, the extreme case would be that they like to be in their office in a black box and the work comes in once and then out it goes the other. And I don't have to deal with anyone. You know, there's people like, so it's about building a profile, which you touched on before. And I think, you know, we often think about talking about profile as external to the firm, you know, the seminars, all that sort of stuff. But if you're in a big international law firm, it's the internal stuff that's really important. You know, somewhere someone's going to ask, Alex, you're going out for a partner, they're going to ask some senior associate somewhere in the back of Hong Kong in a conversation that happened, what do you think of Alex? What's he like?
Yeah.
You know, that's someone's going to ask that question. And then someone's going to be sitting on a panel somewhere making a decision about whether you're partner off and got another 20 to 60 people there. Yeah. And in the back of their voice, they've got, Alex, he was a nice bloke. He's really solid. And I think, and I'm speaking out of school because I'm not in a law firm, I think the subjectivity at that level is pretty high. And maybe even more so when you get to equity, like the subject, I mean, you know, it's much more business case driven. You've got to be able to show your metrics. Yeah. But the element is, you know, who knows you?
That's really interesting because it's not the first time I've heard that. We were talking before we kind of came online. A good friend of mine at one of the big four, when he was going out for partner, and he said, having gone through that process, one of the key things now he's kind of in the camp, as it were. When someone's name is mentioned around the table, if kind of there's just tumbleweed and everyone just quickly moves on, then you know that person hasn't got a chance in hell, irrespective how good a technical person they are for whatever they are. You know, you have to be known. Now, it's really interesting actually hearing you talk about the narrative, because the metrics are the metrics, right? Billables, all this kind of stuff, revenue, how you built your business case, and so on. I think we'll park the management bit for a moment in terms of the people management bit. Yeah. But much in terms of what I do, and I agree with you. I was, one of my colleagues I work with said, "Why are you going for professional services? They'll never buy what we do." And I was like, "I've been in the industry. It'll take time, but once you're in, you're in." Yeah. And much like you, I really enjoy working with lawyers and especially partners, because once they get it in terms of what I do around leveraging social media, you see the light bulb moment, and they get it because they are intelligent human beings. They just need logic and process behind it. And we very much talk about, when I'm working with a partner, I say, okay, on paper, technically, you are exactly the same as partner X in the building next door in a law firm, different color branding, but they do the same. So what is it that you bring to the table that they don't, where technically on paper you do the same thing? And sometimes I get, okay, I need to think about that. So I then play it back. Okay, if I picked up the phone to any of your clients right now, how would they describe to me what you do for them? And I doubt very much they start with X, Y, Z as a partner with X number of years and They talk to me in a business capacity around the value that you bring over and above being a technically brilliant lawyer. It's that kind of the commerciality around it. And it's once they kind of understand that, if they can then tell their narrative. So, I'm working with Herbert Smith Freehills at the moment. I'll talk about it publicly. And one of their counsel, he's actually just been promoted to partner. You have these conversations, and it transpired. In his former life, he was a detective in Australia. And some of his colleagues didn't even know that he was a detective in his former life in Australia. And now we have that story on his profile, and it's a real conversation starter. Now, granted, not everybody has a unique background like that. But everyone has a story to tell, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think it is. And it's a way to connect as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a kind of another way to show a little bit of vulnerability in a strange way. You wouldn't think, well, for lawyers, it's showing vulnerability anyway.
Can't show weakness.
Yeah, you're sort of showing that I'm more than just a collection of my titles and where I've worked in the last, 15, 20 years. And you're sort of building a bit of a picture. And I mean, if anything, this COVID-19 and what the sort of shape of the world's in it, one thing I noticed, I don't know if about you, but I've talked to more people in the course of the time I've been away than I have done in months. And it's about relationships, isn't it? I'm talking to my contacts as business relationships, and I think it's the same for lawyers as well. And part of that is showing that personality and that relationship sort of stuff on LinkedIn. It's a profile.
How do you, on the internal influence piece, because there's some interesting narrative coming out online around how social media in kind of the communities has created this community effect. And I know people more on Facebook now than I do on the street. I probably, in terms of people on our street, I probably wouldn't tell you who they were walking past them. I now know who they are on Facebook, or the WhatsApp groups that have been set up to support the vulnerable and so on. Yeah. And there's now this narrative around how can organizations kind of harness that and bring that into the business, so you create these internal communities. Now, the partnership structure doesn't necessarily lend itself to that, because you basically got 100, 200, 300 CEOs. So how do you, even kind of pre-COVID-19, how would you advise someone to drive that internal influence, but not come across as an arsehole at the same time when they're doing it, if you get my drift?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge. I think this depends of where you're coming from. Like if you're coming from the firm's perspective, or you're coming from your perspective, where you have that experience in social media and you see the benefits of how to do it, you come from a certain perspective. Now, when I come for working with a client, whilst I'm paid by the firm, I'm looking at it from my client's perspective. Of course, the ideal of a coaching environment is to see what the firm wants, find out what the client wants, and see where they align and focus on the alignment. That's the outcome, what you get of coaching. You're both aligning for the same sort of cause. So to build influence as an individual is a slightly different thing than to collective as a whole, as building influence and connect people all together. It's maybe a slightly more self-interested view on influence. And when I talk about influence in this sense, it's like I talked about just before, it's about being known. So it's like, I often ask two questions, like, who do you need to know? Well, it's probably three. Who needs to know you? And what do you want to be known for? And I know it's a really simple thing, but a general thing. And the thing is, people have a perception of you. And I'm big on feedback. So I always try and get my clients to get feedback in some shape or form. And my argument for feedback is essentially that it's information that already exists. It's just new to you. Like people have a view on you, right? People have got a view. You can decide if you want to tap into that or not. If you don't ask feedback, then you can stay in that world of ignorance or delusion. I mean, Oscar Wilde said, like, ignorance is like an exotic flower. Touch it and the bloom is gone. And I kind of like that. There is an element of that. If you want to know, but what you do is when you get that information, when you get that feedback, whether you've had a 360 or whether it's more personal feedback, now you've got something to do. You've got something you can work on. You've got some data and think, well, I don't accept that. It's not true. And then you've got two things. Then you've got something you might have to change. Maybe you need to change the way you conduct yourself in meetings. Maybe you need to change the way you conduct yourself as a leader. Maybe you need to be less abrupt, better in your delegation, et cetera, whatever it is. Maybe you need to be better at building your business. Maybe you need to be a better technical lawyer. You've got the reality of something you might have to improve on, but you've got the bigger challenge often, and that's the perception. Alex is an absolute git to work with. That's the general. You talk to senior associates, they say he's an absolute git to work with. He's just, he sets unrealistic expectations. He gives me deadlines at 7 p.m. at night, expects it at 9 a.m. on the morning next morning, and then doesn't give to the client for 2 weeks later. And maybe that happened once, right? By extreme circumstances for a legitimate reason, but you didn't get the time because you're so smashed to explain to the associate or the senior associate what happened. And suddenly this is the impression of you. That's just one example. And so you need to deal with that oppression because, as I said, somewhere someone asks someone, what's it like to work? Is an absolute git to work with. You don't really want that sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying, this is just my view, of course. This is one view of this. This is not that. But this is how I look at it from clients is, well, what's the impression of someone? How do you build influence? And I also think, the reality is there's certain decision makers in a law firm.
Mm-hmm.
They're often partners. They're often senior partners. There's an executive. It makes sense that they know you.
Yeah.
And they know what you do.
Indeed.
And then you have to find a way to share what you do in a way that doesn't make yourself, as you explained before, you don't yourself looks like a self-aggrandizing git, but you're letting people know your narrative and your story, what you're doing. If you've done a big piece of work, do the right people know about it? Or if you're building your practice in a certain way, are you having the right conversations? And there's a number of ways to go on.
As a coach then, focusing on, I said, I've spent 3 years in industry. So I've seen those individuals that you refer to, and sometimes that's just who they are in terms of their personalities. And sometimes it is what it is, and and I think 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it was kind of acceptable. It'd be interesting to see what the next generation does accept. But if we reflect on the fact that lawyers are typically more on the I side, they're not comfortable in terms of actually coming out of their little black box of being a technical person. They're not that much of a people person.
Yeah.
How do you help someone actually? How do you help someone actually overcome that in terms of, you advise them, this is what I suggest you do. They then go and try and do that. It's a clunky approach to the executive. What? Go away. I'm not interested in that because they've tried to do something, it hasn't worked. They then may come back to you and go, hang on a second, Stuart, you told me to go and you coached me to go and do this. I did that, and that's now backfired on what you told me to do.
So one thing I would say about coaching is I don't generally give advice. I don't say to a client, you should go and do this. Mm-hmm. The idea of coaching, of good coaching, well, you do give advice at times. So it's not, you might give advice. If someone asks you, should I go and get a mentor? Yes, I should give them. Should I get some feedback? Yes, that's a pretty good idea. Get some feedback. Do you think I should talk to my boss about? There's certain things where you will, you sort of give basic routes because in the reasonable course of things, they're the things that help you get ahead in your career and that. So, but what I would do is explore someone's view on like, well, you've got this challenge. Let's use that example you've got. So let's have a look at this feedback. We're told that you're really difficult to work with. Well, what do you want to do about it? Well, what do you see? Is that significant to you? And I might say, no, it's just because I've got really high expectations. I expect really high of them. And you say, okay, all right, cool. But you've got a problem because everyone thinks you're a git to work with. How are you going to balance that? And you're getting a fairly big high churn and the managing partner wants this to be improved before you go up to partnership. What do you want to do about it?
Yeah.
And, I mean, it depends. It's a very individual thing, but often people will say, well, I don't really want to come across that way. I don't really like that they think of me that way. It's just, that's how I get things done. This is the work. And so then we'll have to explore, well, what's ways which we could address that? What are some of the key things? You might pull up this one for an example, and this is consistent. This is a consistent one everywhere. If an associate or junior lawyer thinks someone's difficult to work with, it's often unrealistic deadlines that seemingly afterwards weren't that necessary. It seems to be a sore point. I mean, there's lots of other things, but this seems to be a sore point. So then you could ask your client about that. Well, what can we do to address that? And usually I'll come up with saying, well, I probably need to communicate better. All right. So then we can well, next time you delegate a work and you have to do it, ask yourself, does it have to be done by 9 a.m. tomorrow? And if it does, spend like 3 or 4 minutes explaining the why.
Yeah.
Well, why? And then if you don't have to send it off to the client because the client's changed their mind or something like that, have a conversation with the associate. So there's small things you can do. So you're looking, and I won't be saying do that, but I'll be asking them, what do you think of the ways to do it? So it's not so much me. But last thing I want is a client to say, you told me to do this and it didn't work. All right. I never get myself, because it's not about me. I mean, I'm not the expert here. You're the expert.
Yeah.
It's your ways to try and explore what works for you. And an element of that is practice and trying it.
Yeah.
You will, there is a fair element of like, okay, you've got your personality, you've got your style, you've got your strengths and weaknesses. You've got to find a way to try and achieve some of these things. And some that's like, well, I can try this. All right, go and put it into practice. And then next time I see him, we'll have a chat. Did that work? Well, kind of worked here, didn't kind of work there. Let's see what works. This sort of idea, it's not my philosophy, but this idea that you just sort of come in and you sort of do this, and this, and it all sorts out.
Yeah.
It's
not life.
No, it's not life, I don't think it's life. And I think interesting, you mentioned the thought-provoking, I call them thought-provoking seminars. So I've done this throughout the region in Asia and in the UK on webinar. And one of the ones I do is leveraging failure for high performance.
Okay.
And the idea is that
Yeah.
the general idea is that, you know, lawyers generally aren't that great at making mistakes. I mean, being a perfectionist as a lawyer in a general sense is a very good trait, right?
Yeah.
To an extent, you know, if you're really exacting in that, some of the best lawyers are unbelievably exacting. That, you know,
Yeah.
the danger of course, that's the complete opposite to being innovative, right?
Yeah.
So the more perfectionist you are, the less likely you are to try something new. If you're trying to try something new, then not everything you try will have an impact. And so that dealing with the failure when things stuff up is an important aspect. So when I'm working with a client, that's one of the things I have in the back of my mind is, you know, we try things here. We
Yeah.
try and see what works. And they're very, as you said, they're cerebral. All my clients, I mean, they don't really make mistakes. They see things. They're very self-aware once they're given the opportunity. Oh, I don't want to talk myself down, but one of the things is one of the big benefits of having an executive coach as a law partner is you just have an hour to stop.
Yeah.
You know, and focus and reflect on your career. Like like a lot of them are just busy, just busy, reactive. It's like, well, is this the way you want to? Are you doing the things that you enjoy? You know, are you focused? Are you building your team? You want to build your team, got no time. So how do we do this? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
No, it's as I said, it's all, I can just feel myself, you know, back in the firm way back when. And we had an amazing 3 years and worked with some incredibly talented people. I hate asking this because I think it's such a stupid question, because the generational thing. Are you seeing a difference between a partner of, I don't know, being in the game 10 years and this next generation of lawyer coming through in terms of their kind of overall view on career trajectory, on actually what they want to do, what they're seeing from what they're hearing from their clients, and how things should be done kind of today versus how things were done 20 years ago?
Yeah, I'd say yes and no. And I would also say, I don't think I'm actually a good person to ask that. And the reason I say that is this, is if you come to me, if a firm employs me to work with their counsel, they're drinking the Gatorade, aren't they? You know, you're on this track as it is. You want to be a partner. You're doing the things that the firm expects you to be a partner. And whilst they've probably changed over time, they largely fit the same mold that they have. So if you're at that space, if you're not that sort of form, you've got a challenge, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
If you want the freedom of a different sort of more reasonable hours, etc., particularly at the top end of town, the expectation on the hours is huge, right? Yeah. And it's not so much an expectation; it's just what they do.
Yeah,
you know,
it's what it is. Yeah, indeed. It's the reason I asked the question is I remember running a session for a client in London, a bunch of M&A associates, and we were talking about profile and presenting profile, you know, your profile on LinkedIn, and I had an example of one of their the partners, M&A partner, and the individual responded to me going, well, I think that's ridiculous. That's not who I am. And I have to work all these hours that I'm sent, and I don't actually like my clients and this and that. And I've been an ex-recruitment consultant, I had 20 associates in this room. I kind of paused what I was doing. I said, well, no one's making you sit here. No one's making you come into work every day to do this. So if that's how you genuinely feel, then leave. And there's this kind of stunned silence that I thought we were here for social media training. I was like, no, seriously. And also, I didn't play. I said, look, if you don't believe in this, if you don't want to be here, then don't be here. But you're an associate for this firm. I got a good idea of how much money you're being paid to do this in the age that you currently are. So you are in a very, very lucky position. So you have a life choice to make. Do you suck it up and take the money, or you just make a life decision and move on? This individual then went very kind of very sheepish, and I was like, you know, no one is making you do anything that you don't want to do in life, right?
Yeah, that's true. But then the other side of that is to say, you know, you'd like to be a partner, you just don't want to go through it this way. Yeah. And this is the model you got. So you've got this sort of natural tension. There is, you make a truthful point. It's a valid point. There is a way these law firms work. And if you want to succeed in them, then you have to conform to some degree element. You know, there is an element of, that's the culture of the firm you have to. What I would say though, is I think, one of the things I think when particularly maybe at council level, where you've sort of in that between, you're trying to get partnership, and you know, partnership can be a bit like a carrot that just
Yeah.
keep sort of edging out sort of a little bit. There's going to be a bit of frustration there with the whole system and the model and stuff like that. One of the things I often do is I just tell my clients that you have to remember you're in a crazy business model.
Yeah.
Your business model is a bit mad. It's a bit screwy. Now, that's unfair to say because, you know, if you're earning a couple of $1 million or pounds a year, it's very hard to say you've got a screwy
business model's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. But from someone like me who's outside the law and and you come and you're dealing with the day-to-day metrics of things and they're frustrated by the number of hours they're working, stuff like that. That's right. You can make money two ways here. You can either work longer hours or you can get those people around you to work longer hours. Yeah. And usually you do both. Right? And I think that's useful because I don't, as someone outside the firm, let's just sort of, if I can just touch on quickly, like this idea of work-life balance.
Yeah.
It's very hard to have work-life balance when you have when you have to work so many hours a day.
Yeah.
And I often deal with this situation. It's like triage. If I have a client that's come to me and said they've worked 200 hours in the last 14 days, I don't say to them, you need to change this, this, and this, because to be honest, it's triage, right?
Yeah.
In my view, like you're dealing with a system, you're trying to make this system work, and there's going to be periods in time where they do some of them doing this, and some people choose to do it.
They do,
and they can for whole careers. That's their choice. That's not my prerogative to sort of judge or decide on that. But I do look at it and think, yeah, we're in a triage situation here. You're talking about fine tuning things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I'm looking at is to fine tune. It's like a triage situation. You're in the thick of it. You can't come in and make really big changes. And I think that's one of the dangers people can do who aren't familiar with the legal systems. You come in, you've got to make all these big leadership changes. Like, well, actually, the changes you can actually make here are quite fine tuning. If you start talking leadership with a partner who's smashed for time, I mean, you're just going to get glazed out of your eyes.
Yeah.
I come up with this, it's like a 3 formula. If you want to improve your leadership as a partner, there's kind of like 3 areas which you can sort of like a hack, almost like a hack. One is how you behave in meetings, because you're on show in meetings. And so everyone sees you. So it's a pretty obvious one. When you delegate work, whether you spend a little bit extra time to explain the why, why it's important, what's its significant, etc. And 2, when you give feedback on delegated work. If you can improve those, and when I say give feedback, that means not just like red lines across stuff, fix, you know?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, there's going to be times, I'm a realist, I'm a pragmatist, there's going to be times where you're going to be short and sharp, the pressure's on, you've been up in Australia, maybe you've been on a call to Rio Tinto in London, you've been up all night and your associate gives you something that's got typos in it and you're not going to be at the top of your frame of mind, shall we say. But generally speaking, if you can take the extra time to give some solid feedback, and I don't just mean feedback in the sense of like, you need to fix this and this, but just taking a little bit of time to ask them, all right, you didn't get this right. What could I do next time to help you get it right?
Yeah.
You know, just that little bit of a question. Those 3 things, and because when I've worked with some clients, I've gone and interviewed all their reports, you know, all the juniors and associates to get a sense of these. And this is a theme. If you can sort of improve those 3 things, your associates think you're great.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's kind of, and the thing is, that's not unique to law firms, right? That's just good management skills. That's top down, top up management. Your your subordinates should be able to feel they can manage up, and you should be able to kind of manage down. I learned that very early on in my career in my world of recruitment, when we were quarterly driven, heavily commission driven, and I had an invoice which was then had to be rescinded because the candidate didn't start, but I was looking at my commission check, and I just didn't tell the manager until after the quarter had finished. So I said, I know that's going to hit me next quarter, but I want to get a commission check. He went absolutely ballistic at me initially, and then took me outside to explain why. That whilst you think that X whatever thousands of pounds is not very many, there are a number of you around the firm doing this. That suddenly all rolls up to the top to actually quite a large number, which then, you know, we're a listed company. That's times multiply that around the world. That starts to cause us a bit of a headache. So I'd far rather that you felt you were able to come to me and have that conversation, and we probably could have worked something out, rather than the stuff that I then have to deal with because I got to take that up because you didn't have that conversation. So yeah, it's as I said, and even though law firms are unique and the model is unique, at the end of the day, you're running a business, and you're actually running a people business. And people need to be happy. People need to be happy in their work. And if you've got happy people, they're going to do things for you. And I think you're completely right around everyone who goes into law kind of knows what they're going into. So there is this kind of, I know that this isn't going to be easy, but if I do what I do, the upside and the reward, and I'm not necessarily just talking financial in terms of the job satisfaction in terms of what
quality of work
can be, can be huge. So let's touch on social media. Does that ever come into anything that you do in terms of your coaching or conversations around the outward side of things, or not really?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it would be one of the aspects, if we're talking business development, it would be one of the aspects that I'd point a client, what are you doing on LinkedIn? What's your prospect with that? Have you touched base with your business development?
Yeah.
Like one of the biggest things is just to get a senior lawyer to go and talk to their business development people,
Yeah.
Just go and have the conversation. What could you be doing more? What are they doing on LinkedIn and stuff like that? And look, one of my observations is I often say to clients, I saw your article you posted on LinkedIn. It was written for other lawyers, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. And I say to them, well, that's fine. That's fantastic. Because one of the great things is that lawyers are one of the few professions that still read, right?
Yeah.
And they'll read things. And I know when I've written articles at different times, people have actually read them, which is like quite a novelty for LinkedIn, really is. I mean, I have this joke, right, that, I can write an article and I don't just put content. I think about it like it's a bit of a me in it, and I put it out there. A small number, 150 or something, people actually go and actually read it. But I'll take a photo of myself outside, like in a room in Hong Kong at Free Heels or something, and doing a presentation, and I'll have 3,000 people view it. But you can be cynical about that, but it's also the reality, right? This is what your sort of reality. So no, I wouldn't have a big say like you, but I'd be really interested what you think lawyers should be using LinkedIn for.
I believe 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, it probably wasn't so relevant. If you fast forward today, even pre-COVID-19, we get told a lot that, my clients aren't on LinkedIn. Well, if you put general counsel into LinkedIn, I did it yesterday with a client, I think there are 611,000 GCs on LinkedIn. So you're telling me that your client base isn't on LinkedIn. And then you got chief execs, CTOs, heads of this, et cetera, et cetera. The next thing is then to understand we're now in this online world for the foreseeable. And this is where you can have business conversations. This is where you can then bump in, much like you and I, before, 2-3 weeks ago, you and I didn't know we existed on the planet. And here we are now having a bona fide business conversation. And I do get a lot of, well, everybody knows who I am. Okay, within your circle of everybody knows who you are, that's great. But actually, why don't we start to expand that, from the internal influence, let's expand that external influence and start to use the network online who knows who you are and advocate you and the firm. Let's not forget, whilst it's lawyers can still be, well, it's all about me. There is the firm behind this, and this can help you cross-sell, upsell. It's going to help you move into other areas. And I guarantee there are people out there who don't know who you are, but may want to work with you, but may want to instruct you. And the other thing is, certainly for counsel and the young generation of lawyer, this is absolutely critical in terms of how they're going to build their book of business, how they're going to build their careers. Because if you look at, I think the average age of CEOs, certainly in the TMT tech sector, is now kind of like mid-30s. They're all online. They're all on Twitter, and they will have a certain expectation that that's how I want to communicate. And much like with yourself, and the great thing about LinkedIn is you can just show it. If you don't believe me, there it is. And when they see that, and this is the majority, when they see the logic of it, and they realize this doesn't actually take that much time, because it's just the time is investing in your profile. Once that's done, once they understand the mechanics of what we're trying to do and how the system actually works, and get the system to work for you in terms of training your feed, the algorithm, curating your newsfeed, actually a quick like and a quick comment can be really, really powerful, provided it's done in the right place. And of course, lawyers like metrics, and you get the metrics on LinkedIn, but those are all starting to change. So it's, for me, from a BD perspective, it is absolutely critical. And also, they need to own it because they're the subject matter expert. Because I get asked a lot, well, can my PA do this for me? Well, no. Because if he or she posts something on your behalf, then someone responds with a question. You can't then expect them to respond because they're not the technical experts and they're not you. And I do see this, what we refer to as posting and ghosting, and more so in the big four. You see a very senior person will share an article on LinkedIn, and I play around with it. I comment on it, thank them for writing it, to test whether they probably don't even know it's gone out on their behalf. It's been sent on their behalf. And at times I've ended up having conversations with other commentators on the post about the post, but the actual original author hasn't even come in to even like or get involved in the in the conversation. And much like we recognize that social media isn't for everybody, and there's some who get it and absolutely fly, and they just, you can see within a half an hour they totally get what we're doing. And I use them. I go, I know you're busy, but here are your peers at other firms. They are just as busy as you are, yet they are finding back to your triage point, they're finding the time in their working day to engage and look at what's happening to them in terms of their profile versus you.
What would you say to this person who's a bit more like me, who's a bit hesitant to use LinkedIn? They're not going to be out there everywhere all the time, because you get some people on LinkedIn that just content process, they're everywhere, it's personal, they're just the extrovert. What would you say to someone that's a bit hesitant to use LinkedIn?
And again, we get asked that a lot. It's little and often will over time build your brand. So start just watching initially, just watch what other people are doing, then a like, then a comment, and I'll share some videos with you afterwards for you to have a look at. Just start to get a feel of how it works. But the clue is kind of in the word. It's a social network. So just start having conversations. And the great thing in terms of what you do, because you're in the round of kind of the executive coach, you can start commenting on CEO posts. You can start commenting on managing partners posts. Go and find other executive coaches, listen to see what they're talking about, and just go and have a conversation with people as you would do now. And you're absolutely well within your rights to disagree with people, as long as you disagree with that person in a face-to-face situation. I remember 2 summers ago, huge argument online with an individual in the UK who didn't believe at the time that LinkedIn should be used for lawyers as a waste of time. I think the one post we were debating on ended up having 10,000 views. I got 3 business inquiries from it, from people I had no idea, because they're like, I disagree with that individual, but I agree with what you're saying. And that's how it comes in. So it's watch, see what's going on, and then just start to do a bit of a like, a bit of a comment. If no one responds, it doesn't matter. If you share something, it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't matter. Back to what you were saying earlier, try some things. If it doesn't work, try something else. You can give me a call whenever and say, Alex, I did this, it didn't work. Okay, I'll have a look at what's what. But the key thing is about being consistently present. Because if you're consistently present, then much like you and I, you start bumping into. And the beauty is, we've already discussed, is that lawyers are great at referring to other lawyers. And if you can start to get into those conversations online, they see what you're doing. You could start doing your own podcast around this and interview some of your clients around what their experience was of working with you. We'll do vlogs and so on. Then just get out there and, to my view, just start having fun. Now, bear in mind, I've been on the platform since the platform's basically been around. So for me, this is completely and utterly second nature. And I have to sometimes take a step back and recognize that for some people, this is terrifying. For them, genuinely, they say to me, this is terrifying, because their fear is, I'm going to go viral, I'm going to do something wrong, I'm going to break the internet. Oh my God, what if somebody sees this? And you have to understand that from a psychological perspective, that's where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's interesting, because you always think it's like all or nothing, right?
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing you got to, and I think that's interesting. I mean, the interesting thing, one is, I don't know, have your view on this, but connecting with other people. That's an interesting one. Like I often contacted by people who are selling coaches to coaches, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, It's a weird one. So, coach, I get people connecting with me saying, "Hey, use LinkedIn to generate leads." I'm like, really? You haven't had
I
no
get
more.
I get ones like selling coaches, like I can give you so many hot leads in so many periods of time, right? And then they contact me with this line for coaches, this line that has no reference to that. But
Yeah.
I can see what your title is. I know why you want to connect with me. It's because you want me as a client.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so I just say, no, it's not for me.
Well, that's fine. I think, from my perspective, that you don't necessarily want to connect with the competition. If the connection inbound, they look half sensible, there's a crossover of people that you know and respect. My view is connect with them, because at the end of the day, you may never hear from them again. They may engage with your content, that may move through, and then happy days. But in short, the more that you give to LinkedIn and social media generally, but let's focus on LinkedIn because it's kind of where most people are in terms of professional services, the more it gives back. Well, Stuart, that has been awesome. Thank you so much. More than happy to have you on again, and we can do the whole social media piece in terms of influence. I could have carried on forever, but unfortunately, my time this end is.
We just warmed up, didn't we?
Yeah, exactly. Is that? Well, I think. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll have another more deep dive on the social media aspect from a prospecting perspective. But thank you. How can people, if in terms of my network, people can find you on LinkedIn? They can connect with you. Say they've heard this, and if you want to do that, that'd be awesome. But you didn't do a joke.
I didn't even do a joke. No jokes.
A joke about the video.
I didn't do my hair. That's right. Just say my camera.
Next time.
Next time I'll do it. Next time I'll line it up. I only have one joke too. So.
But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And to all my listeners, thank you for tuning in. To everybody watching this, thank you. Please do connect with Stuart. I'll put the link in the podcast and on the YouTube video. But otherwise, Stuart, keep safe, keep well, and we'll do this again.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex.
Cheers.